Hey everyone. I wanted to reach out to you guys today. I know that I've been getting several calls a day now relating to something called the Article 5 Convention, what is otherwise called a Convention of States, and to some even call it a con-con. Whether derogatory or not, I think there people are on both sides of the argument on that, but con-con is short for Constitutional Convention, so if you find it a negative connotation, then I guess that's the way you feel about it. Things seem to be rather relative these days anyway. But to address some of the questions that I've had, I wanted to be able to open this up to my friends to be able to dialogue this particular issue if they wish, and to discuss the issue. The first thing is we all know that the federal government is out of control. We know that people are desperately, frantically trying to find a way to be able to fix our problems. And because of people being so emotional, people tend to run toward the emotional side of an argument rather than the intellectual side of an argument. And that's arguably where you can get into the nitty-gritty and the depths of the details, as well as unintended consequences. Now, I don't suggest that I'm coming to you as some sort of brainiac genius. I'm just telling you that I've done enough of my homework to be able to understand what side of the issue I fall on as it relates to a lot of constitutional issues that we face. The other thing I find beneficial to me, and sadly in some cases, is that I am an activist. I have been active in the area for a long time, and I'm starting to see and understand things a little differently as I see the way people react to certain stimuli that is created by the federal government, the states, localities, and other entities. In this particular instance, I am referring to the Convention of States and the people that are supporting an Article 5 convention. So, without getting into too much of the weeds, I know that this argument is very, very exhaustive. It's very complicated for a lot of people if you're new to the topic. So, it's important that we discuss it in the easiest way possible, using things like logic and common sense, and using consistency. Most of us realize that when we see things that are inconsistent, we realize that that might be something that should be questioned, but yet when we apply it with the emotional state that we have, we tend to abandon or not see the inconsistencies that we otherwise should. So if you can my argument is that if you can remain consistent in your argument, whether it's defending the faith, whether you're talking about constitutional issues, you should be seen as somebody that would be more trusted because of the fact that you haven't given arbitrary information, which really is what creates a lot of distrust. So what is Article 5? Actually, Article 5 is in the Constitution. It's Article 5 of the Constitution. And it is the amendment article. It's the one where any changes to our Constitution are made. It does not mean that statutory authority by any stretch of the imagination or public policy, administrative policy, or otherwise supersedes the Constitution. That is an absolute subversion of our Constitution, and people should really know that, considering that administrative policy is not law, and it is what I call jurisdictional in the fact that it does have a place, a lawful place, but it also has an unlawful place. And thinking somehow that states can create statutes or the feds that can create statutes that supersede the Constitution is absolutely unconstitutional. And the Article 5 has two methods of proposing amendments to the Constitution and two modes of ratification. So it took me a while to understand this. Two methods to propose amendments, right? And two modes of ratification. So what this means is two methods of deciding how we're actually going to make these changes to the Constitution, and if we know how the Constitution works, two modes to be able to ratify it, to put those amendments into the Constitution lawfully. So either the Congress proposes amendments, which is what they have done for the last 27, when 2/3 of both houses see fit, or a convention called by Congress actually proposes amendments if 2/3 of the states, I believe it's 34, actually apply for it. And it gets into the weeds here, and they've really worked hard to try to be able to figure out whether they're supposed to be, 34 states that apply for a single type of an amendment like the balanced budget amendment or term limits, or whether they're all supposed to be lumped in. And when you start lumping in things, it just starts looking more like an agenda to me anyway. In either case, the proposed amendments officially come part of the Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of three-fourths of the several states or by the conventions in three-fourths thereof. And so it also says that as the one or other mode of ratification may be proposed by Congress if a new constitution comes out of the convention. However, it could have its own mode of ratification. So what that basically means is that, you know, some people will say, well, we can't, it's impossible to have a runaway convention. You know, it's a safeguard, whatever, safety net, whatever. It really isn't, because when you look at what happened with the Articles of Confederation and we ended up getting a new constitution out of that convention, and what ended up happening was the ratification actually was changed from being unanimous consent in the Articles of Confederation to three-fourths of the states in the new Constitution. So one could say that if we actually did open up this can of worms and we decided that we wanted to have a convention, we could completely have a completely different ratification process. So that's what Article 5 is. So you know that all 27 amendments to the Constitution, including the 10 first Bill of Rights, were initially proposed and passed by Congress, and after that sent to the states for ratification. Never in 230 years since our Constitution was ratified has a convention been used to propose amendments. The framers of the Constitution created Article 5 in order to provide for a peaceful and orderly method to correct errors in the Constitution. This is vital, ladies and gentlemen. But the first question I would ask you, and this is really good to think about. Number one, if we're going to go into this issue, we should be people that understand our Constitution as the framers did. So my question to you would be, how much do you know about the Constitution? If you're honest with yourself, you'll realize you probably don't know as much as you should. I've been studying it a long time, and you know, although I may know more than some, the knowledge really is acquired depending on how much you actually read to be able to understand it. But to be able to accept the idea that our federal government is a runaway government, which it is, and that we need to rein in the out-of-control government, which we need to do, but we need to use Article 5 to do it, is very, very misleading, because that's not what Article 5 is for. If we're a true constitutionalist, we believe that the application for the Constitution should be understood by what the founders had envisioned on what the Constitution was for and how the provisions were supposed to be laid out. So in that basis alone, using it to rein in an out-of-control government is misleading. And if you really know more about the principles behind the Constitution, you'll know that not only were the people supposed to be held holding the federal government accountable, but so are the states. And so now then you start getting involved in people being educated in the Constitution and using elements of nullification, which have actually been lawfully used, although the Convention of States folks, I have heard, have said that that they don't believe in nullification. I can tell you for sure that Idaho's Attorney General Lawrence Wasden does not believe in nullification, because he's told me so, but also supports the 9th and 10th Amendments, which is a little concerning to me because it seems a little inconsistent in his argument. So the other thing I wanted to mention is we can talk about the 1787 Federal Convention, and Colonel George Mason said of the new Constitution that now the plan now to be formed will certainly be defective, as the Confederation has been found on trial to be. Amendments therefore will be necessary, and it will be better to provide for them in an easy, regular, and constitutional way than to trust chance and violence. The other thing to think about too is when the state opts for a convention, who do you think they're going to send to the convention as delegates? People will tell you that it's not an autonomous body. It tells you it can be controlled by the Supreme Court or the legislature or Congress or the judiciary. All of that stuff is incorrect. The fact is that it's an autonomous body because it needs to be working as a form of government on its own to be able to propose those amendments, then to turn back to the states to be ratified. So the other thing too is, if these delegates are going to be chosen from the state legislatures, let me ask you something. If you go to our Idaho Freedom Foundation Freedom Index, what you'll find, and don't look at the score so much, because the legislators will tell you, oh, they hate them because they give them a low score or whatever. It's not rocket science. If you look at what they support, you'll know that they've got horrible ratings and the fact that they deserve the horrible ratings they get. But nonetheless, if you only have 50%, if we're the reddest state in the union, and we have people that are, and we have we're condemned by the Republicans as being extreme. How constitutional do you think they are? And those very people are going to be the ones that are going to be our delegates to the Constitution that's going to help us restore our form of government. These are the same people that have appealed to the federal government for subsidies, for more money, to be able to subsidize the states. Last I heard, I think it was 30 cents of every dollar in Idaho is actually federal money. Where do you think that came from? It came from the very people that are going to be delegates to your constitutional convention with 50% freedom index ratings. That's where it came from. So this stuff, when you start looking at this, it starts to make really easy sense if you understand the basics of what we're dealing with here. COS action repeatedly claims as one of its key arguments that Mason said that Article 5 should include a convention method so that whenever Congress or the federal government becomes tyrannical and violates the constitutional limitations, the states could in turn propose amendments to the Constitution in order to rein them in. Attorney Michael Ferris, on behalf of the COS, wrote, George Mason demanded that the provision, the convention for proposing amendments, be included in Article 5 because he correctly forecast the situation we face today. He predicted that Washington, D.C. would violate its constitutional limitations and the states would need to make adjustments for the constitutional text. Listen, if we're going to be consistent in our argument, let's look at this. If the founders had anticipated this abuse, which they most likely did, and they said that it was supposed to be used to be able to rein in an out-of-control government, then how are they going to do that, number one, when the people are uninformed about the Constitution, or they're going to use the application to be able to rein in an out-of-control government, which Article 5 clearly wasn't for? If our founders openly said that it was to rein in the abuses of the federal government, why didn't it say that? To be able to throw off the chains of the government and establish a new form of government in the Declaration of Independence, although there's a variety of mechanisms to be able to save ourselves from the tyranny of the federal government. And one of those ways, surely, is not to be able to have the states apply and the people apply for money to the federal government like it's a bank, and then somehow turn around and say, you guys are overspending your money. I mean, exactly what are we looking at here, and how difficult is this argument really? So what is an Article 5 convention? An Article 5 convention is a federal convention. Some people will tell you that it's a convention of states, but it clearly is not because it's in the federal Constitution. And we know that when the states created the federal Constitution, they actually created the federal Constitution to be able to separate or to be able to offer the power, the limited, few, and defined powers to the federal government, of which the rest were left to the states or the people, right? So it has to be a federal convention. So the fact that it's a convention of states is a misnomer on its own. And so it's a federal convention designed to propose amendments, plural, because they say that it can be limited, but it can't be limited because Article 5 on its face tells you that it's to propose amendments, not amendment, to the federal Constitution by defining an Article 5 convention is a federal Constitution convention, which puts Congress at the head of calling the convention, but gives the states the authority to apply to Congress. If you go further, you look at Black's Law Dictionary, the nation's premier legal dictionary used by law students, actually, has since the second edition in 1910 consistently defined the term constitutional convention as a duly constituted assembly of delegates or representatives of the people of the state or nation for the purpose of framing, revising, or amending the Constitution. The fifth edition to Black's Dictionary, published in 1979, further states Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution provides that a constitutional convention may be called on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the states. An Article 5 convention is, in fact, a constitutional convention. So, what is a constitutional convention? A convention is a formal gathering of deputies or delegates in this particular case, which would probably be those that rule over you at the state that you actually elected into office, that are now going to be in charge of rewriting a new constitution or allegedly just proposing one amendment that's somehow limited by the states. They're chosen and recognized by the people they represent for a common purpose. The convention in Article 5 exercises a sovereign function as defined earlier by Black's Law Dictionary. Now, just so we don't miss this, it's a sovereign function which verifies and confirms what I said about being an autonomous body. It is a convention with the purpose of proposing modifications to government, if you will. Seeing as the convention, by definition, represents the people at large, it has the power and the scope that supersedes established governments. As such, the convention cannot be limited because it is the epitome of the sovereign will of the people. The other thing to be able to consider here is this. We seem to think that people need to reach across the aisle, right? Where we have to we need to sort of meet in the middle, compromise, right? We need to compromise. Well, Hawaii, I think, in one of their bills actually wanted, in their application to a convention, wanted to be able to include the whole 975-page Obamacare bill to the Constitution. People don't read the Constitution now. Why would they read it when you add 975 pages of Obamacare to it? But in an effort for that to pass, what they may end up having to do is to be able to work with other states to be able to try to get them to pass other amendments so that they would pass theirs. In this case, if you have 50 states, or 57 states even, that are involved in this Article 5 convention, you can see another way on how it wouldn't be limited because of the fact that everybody's going to want their piece of the pie. Well, if we ended up passing a constitutional convention for Hawaii, then certainly Iowa, we in the Iowa legislature would, even though we go along with Hawaii, Hawaii's decided to go along with us. And when you start doing that with 50 states, now all of a sudden we've got, I would argue, a huge probability of a runaway convention. The Declaration of Independence clearly reads, "It is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government, to provide new guards for their future security." Referring to the people, James Madison invoked this right in Federalist 40 to justify his actions of the delegates in the 1787 convention, writing that it is the transient and precious right of the people to abolish and alter their governments, as to them they shall be most likely to affect their safety and happiness. What we're starting to see now is, and I should have probably just broke it down into some of the more simple terms, but I think this one as a general overview is super, super important because it will address some of the most basic things that we need to know when we start getting into the Convention of States argument. It was a general view at the time that the conventions representative of the people were the only legitimate bodies to be able to draft, alter, and amend constitutions. Thomas Jefferson, in his notes on the states of Virginia, observed, "The other states in the Union have been of the opinion that to render a form of government unalterable by ordinary acts of assembly, the people must delegate persons with special powers. They have accordingly chosen the special conventions to form and fix their governments." So nowhere that I know does it actually say that the state legislatures have to be delegates to the convention, but it is important to continue to remember, if that is in fact what happens, the kind of people that you've actually put into office to represent you as delegates. The other thing to consider too is that when you interact with Convention of States folks, they will tell you that, and Mark Meckler has told me himself, that well, he knows plenty of people that would be great delegates to be able to restore our Constitution. Well, that might be true, but my question is number one, how do you know? If you're traveling and visiting with all 50 state legislatures, and number two, how are you aware of how they think and what their position is on their freedom and on their constitutional freedom index locally? Because most of the folks that actually are in support of a convention like this really are Republicans, because many of them, many of the Liberty ones, even in Idaho, support things like term limits and a balanced budget amendment. They just don't know the internal workings of those arguments as well as some of the people that actually study this full time. Um, One of the things to consider is that you could say, well, we've got Mark Levin and you know we've got Glenn Beck and we've got all these right-wing talking heads that believe in this convention of states, and so if they're going to believe it, I should believe it. Number one, I would strongly urge you that if what you're seeing outside with the multitude of fires in our country burning is that it's based on the ignorance of the people. If you want to entrust your freedom to somebody else, you don't deserve your freedom. That's the one thing I have to say. And if you have a problem with it, too bad, because it's the truth. If you can't fight for your own freedom, then you're going to allow somebody else to fight for your freedom, and their freedom might be different than yours. Most likely, they don't have the knowledge of the Constitution that some people have. And the other thing to think about is the conspiratorial elements. A lot of people are like, "Oh God, Tom, there you go. You're off on conspiracies again." Well, you have to, you know the old saying, and the old saying is follow the money. And following the money is really a conspiratorial element because they're not openly telling you who's actually supporting it. And what people are telling you is, oh yeah, it's funded by small mom pops like people like me and you, $5 and $10 donations, but you're not looking at their 1099s. You're not looking at the people that have been paid, over $200,000 to be able to advocate and travel for the Convention of States. You're just not. And if you are, then you should be questioning why people are getting that kind of money. And the other thing to consider is, I heard Mark got a fancy car. Hey, that's really cool and all. I wish I had a fancy car. But the question is that the only organization to oppose the Article 5 convention for 40 years, by the way, is the John Birch Society, and yet the Convention of States has only been around a fraction of that time. Well, if they've only been around a fraction of that time, and they've got millions of dollars, and they can pay their people several $100,000 to advocate for an Article 5 convention, is that not, or could that not be considered a conspiratorial element for your consideration? I would argue that it should be. It very well should be. If I run for office, people wanted to see Trump's tax returns. If I ran for office and I was a controversial subject, like I hope I will be one day, people should want to know about where my money comes from. And I should openly be able to tell them where it comes from. But see, I want to come from a position where I've been in the movements long enough where people would trust me anyway. They'd know, you know what, Tom's been true. He's been true to us. He's been true to himself. He's been true to the people. There's really no reason for that. But I should be willing, in full transparency, to be able to show where that money comes from. Oh, well, he might work for that John Birch Society, and if he works for the John Birch Society, then they probably have some kind of an agenda. Well, it's true. We do have an agenda, and the agenda is to be able to restore your liberty to you. That's our job. If our motto is less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, a better world, that doesn't lift JBS up to any other point than helping to educate people on what they need to know so that they can adequately fight for their freedom without listening to some expert that might be the Pied Piper leading them astray. Look what happened when we dealt with the Obama administration. All the liberals, man, they cried on his inauguration day. It was like Jesus came, like it was the second coming of Jesus, right? Oh, our Jesus came and he's going to save us and all that kind of stuff. And no, the right wing was just there laughing and just making fun of him and all that. And I sat back and I watched, only to find out 8 years later the Republicans or the freedom people were doing the same thing with Trump. It's a form of idol worship. When you can entrust your freedom to somebody else, they will sell you down the road. It seems like I remember somewhere Trump even said he could shoot somebody in the middle of Times Square and blah, blah, blah. Something wouldn't even happen. That should be a really scary comment to you. Also, he went into bombing Syria. He went into supporting the USMCA. He went into doing some of these. He ended up supporting the vaccine. I call it the Fast and Furious of vaccines, but you know what I mean. He ended up supporting the vaccines and things. Is that really somebody that you want to trust? I'm not saying that Trump shouldn't be trusted. I'm saying that sometimes people screw up and they make bad decisions, and that people need to hold them accountable. So as I finish this video, we're getting lengthy here. I was glad to be able to cover what an Article 5 convention is, what a convention is, what Article 5 is, what is a constitutional convention. And then in the next video, I'd like to be able to do who calls a convention, is the convention a convention of states, and then go into some other details to be able to talk about ratification, and if it's really not Article 5, then what is it? Again, I'm a student. I'm not claiming to be an expert here. Article 5 takes a lot of time. It's one of many other agenda items that I work on. It's just something to consider, and I'm not beyond being challenged on anything that I say. I just want to be able to share with you some of the things that I know to be true, and that are things that I've also heard in interactions with other people. So I hope you found that beneficial, and I hope to be able to keep posting these to keep you guys informed. So I hope you found that worthwhile. It definitely isn't a sexy topic, but it's something that you guys should really pay attention to. And I'd sure like to get 10,000 views on this video too, and other ones I do, because the things that we're talking about here take seriousness to a whole new level. This is not just about look what Biden did when he fell off the bike, or look what Trump did, or something serious, but a little lesser so. So I'm hoping that we will start putting the emphasis where it needs to be. So I appreciate you guys joining me today. Hope you guys will hang out and watch my future videos. Please share it if you like it, and I'll talk to you later. Thanks.